Mark, we need to talk. I looked up from my laptop, caught off guard by the tone in Lila's voice. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face set with a mixture of tension and something else I couldn't place. Sure, I replied, closing my laptop and gesturing for her to sit. What's on your mind? She hesitated but didn't sit. I've been seeing someone else. I froze, feeling as though someone had slammed the brakes on the entire room. My mind whirred, trying to make sense of her words, but she kept going. I didn't plan for this to happen, Mark. But with you constantly buried in work, never really present, she trailed off, shaking her head as if disappointed in me. I needed someone who would really be there. The accusation hung in the air, cold and sharp. I opened my mouth, but words refused to come out. She was shifting the blame onto me, as though I'd driven her to this. Years of loyalty and late nights. Everything I'd sacrificed to build a good life for us. Was that supposed to count for nothing? I don't understand, Lila. I managed finally, keeping my voice steady. We've been married over a decade. Why not come to me first? She looked down, then back up, eyes steely. Because every time I tried, Mark, you were somewhere else. I felt invisible. Like my needs, my feelings didn't matter. Her words were harsh, but I could hear a strange rehearsed quality to them. I don't want this to end, she continued. I think we should see someone, a therapist, Dr. Alan Reeves. He's supposed to be incredible at helping couples find common ground. I sat there numb. Therapy? This betrayal was somehow our shared problem now? Yet the thought of a future without her filled me with dread. Perhaps there was still something to save. Fine, I said finally. If it means we can work through this, I'll do it. She nodded, giving me the faintest smile, though it felt like a courtesy. I had no idea then how much of myself I was about to lose. A week later, we sat side by side in Dr. Alan Reeves' office, the air heavy with tension. Dr. Reeves was a tall, composed man, with a calm presence and an assured voice. He didn't rush us, letting the silence linger as if he knew that it would coax out something deeper. So, Mark, Dr. Reeves began, after Lila had shared her side. Lila tells me that you've often been preoccupied, working late hours, bringing stress home. She feels overlooked. I nodded, trying to keep my voice even. I admit I work long hours. Architecture can be demanding, but I did it for us, for a better life, for stability. Dr. Reeves smiled faintly, a sympathetic but knowing look. Often, when we're deeply invested in work, it can seem like we're providing for our loved ones. But it's easy to overlook how, on an emotional level, they feel disconnected, sometimes even abandoned. Do you see how this might have contributed to Lila's actions? I felt an uncomfortable twist in my gut. His words made me sound like some absent, unfeeling husband. I've always done everything I could to support Lila, I insisted. I thought that counted for something. Lila interjected, her tone flat but cutting. You thought, Mark, but did you ever ask me if that's what I wanted? If that's what I needed? Her words stung. I'd been so sure of myself, of everything I'd built for us. Now, sitting here, I felt those certainties slipping. Dr. Reeves nodded, pressing gently but firmly. Mark, sometimes we tell ourselves we're being selfless when, in reality, we're acting out of a need for control, a desire to feel indispensable. Have you considered that perhaps your focus on work was, in part, about fulfilling your own sense of identity and value? I frowned, trying to process his words. I've always been dedicated. I take pride in what I do. Dr. Reeves leaned forward slightly, and that dedication is admirable. But relationships require mutual attention, don't they? Perhaps Lila felt like she was losing you to a part of yourself she couldn't access. The words sat heavily between us. I glanced at Lila, searching her face for something. Understanding, maybe, but she kept her gaze level, as though our shared life, our years together, were little more than a collection of missed connections. Let's be honest, Mark, she continued. You put everything into your work, but when it comes to me, I'm just not sure you care enough. I could barely recognize the person she'd become, so cold and detached. Yet, with every word Dr. Reeves said, I felt myself wavering, second-guessing everything I'd believed about us. The first session ended, and I walked out feeling as though a chisel had been taken to the foundation of my identity, the solid ground beneath my feet beginning to crack. The sessions continued, each one chipping away at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Reeves had a way of zeroing in on everything I'd never questioned about myself, pointing out supposed flaws and weaknesses I hadn't seen. He'd tell stories of past clients, men like me, he said, who had ignored their partner's needs until it was too late, who let their egos and blind ambition cost them their marriages. The stories felt designed to hit hard, like small warnings directed solely at me. I could feel the doubt creeping in, a subtle yet persistent voice that whispered, "What if he's right? What if I was selfish or negligent?" Lila, meanwhile, sat beside me with a calm detachment, nodding along with Dr. Reeves' analysis. She seemed to take comfort in his words, as if he were validating every resentment she'd been holding. Every time I tried to explain myself, to defend the way I'd worked to build our life together, they'd both respond with pointed questions that turned my words against me. "Mark," Dr. Reeves said during one session, "do you realize that insisting on your narrative, 'I was doing it for us,' is a way of deflecting responsibility? It's a way of placing yourself in the role of the noble provider without truly understanding Lila's needs." "But I was trying to support us," I replied, feeling the frustration in my voice. "If I didn't push myself, we wouldn't be where we are now. Isn't that part of being a good husband?" Lila let out a small sigh, barely audible, but sharp enough to cut. "You're still missing it, Mark. You never heard me. Not once did you listen to what I was actually asking for." The weight of their shared judgment felt suffocating, as if I were on trial, forced to justify every decision, every late night at the office. I began questioning the very traits that had always defined me: my dedication, my focus, my confidence. I left each session feeling more confused and hollow than the last. Outside the sessions, Lila was distant. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, her tone was clipped, almost indifferent. The warmth that once existed between us was gone, replaced by a tension that lingered in every corner of our home. One evening, I met Sam for drinks. He'd been checking in on me, noticing how withdrawn I'd become, and he wasn't one to let things slide. As I sat across from him, nursing a beer, he studied me, his usual humor absent. "You're not yourself, Mark," he said finally. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then began telling him bits and pieces. I tried to keep it vague, embarrassed to admit the extent of the trouble. But Sam was perceptive, listening carefully, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back, looking thoughtful. "Look, man, I'm not a therapist, but this doesn't sound right to me. Therapy's supposed to help you both work things out, not just break you down." "It's not like that," I said quickly, defending it out of habit. "Dr. Reeves, he just wants me to see where I've gone wrong." "Does he?" Sam raised an eyebrow. "Or is he just convincing you that you're the one to blame for everything?" I frowned, his words unsettling me. "You think he's manipulating me?" Sam shrugged, his eyes steady. "All I'm saying is, don't let anyone strip away who you are, Mark. Don't let them convince you that you're someone you're not." His words lingered, sticking with me long after I left the bar. For the first time in weeks, I felt a faint glimmer of clarity in the fog. But as soon as I walked back into the house and saw Lila, it faded. The weight of her judgment, the coldness in her gaze, it all made me wonder if, deep down, I was the one who truly failed. The following week, I found myself spiraling. The therapy sessions continued their dissection of my character, stripping away every defense I'd ever held close. Dr. Reeves and Lila were an unyielding team, each session a new round of relentless critique. I'd leave his office feeling drained, carrying a gnawing weight of guilt that followed me like a shadow. My work started to slip. I found myself missing deadlines, struggling to focus, something I had never allowed to happen before. The clarity and control I once took pride in felt miles away, replaced by doubt that seeped into every corner of my life. Even the simplest decisions felt loaded, each choice weighed down by an invisible fear of somehow failing Lila further. I was losing myself, piece by piece. One night, Jake, a friend I'd known since college, invited me out. "Let's grab dinner," he said, his tone leaving no room for excuses. He was the kind of friend who wouldn't let me hide. As we sat down in the quiet corner of our favorite pub, he looked at me with a frown, the concern etched clearly on his face. "Man, you don't look good," he said, blunt as ever. "What's going on?" I hesitated, struggling to put it all into words. It's Lila. She's been seeing someone else," I said, barely able to hear myself say it out loud. Jake's face fell, his shock quickly replaced with anger. "Are you serious? And what's she doing about it now? Trying to fix things?" I nodded. "Therapy. We've been seeing this guy, Dr. Reeves. He's good at what he does, I guess." I could hear the doubt in my own voice, but I couldn't bring myself to question it fully. Jake watched me for a long moment, then shook his head. "Look, I'm not trying to step on your process here, but are you sure this therapist is helping? Because, to me, it sounds like he's just twisting everything around to make you feel like it's all your fault." I stared at the table, the doubt resurfacing. That's the thing. I don't know. I thought I was doing everything right, building a life for us, but now, I can't even tell if any of it mattered. Dr. Reeves has this way of making me question everything I thought I knew. Jake leaned forward, his gaze intense. Mark, I've known you a long time. You're one of the most loyal, hardworking guys I know. Don't let this guy turn you inside out. Don't let them make you forget who you are. The words struck something deep in me. I realized how much I'd needed to hear them, how much I'd needed someone to remind me of the man I used to be. A flicker of anger stirred inside, a small but fierce ember that cut through the fog of guilt and doubt. Thanks, Jake, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. Don't thank me, he replied. Just don't let them break you down, all right? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Jake's words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of resistance pushing back against the endless self-blame. I wasn't ready to give in, not yet. The man I'd been was still somewhere inside me, waiting to fight back. The next morning, I went to work with a renewed, if fragile, sense of resolve. I told myself that I was going to focus on what I could control, my projects, my deadlines, the things that had always kept me steady. But as the hours passed, my mind kept drifting back to Lila, to Dr. Reeves, to the gnawing feeling that maybe the cracks weren't just in my marriage, but in my very sense of self. By midday, I couldn't shake the urge to talk to someone else, someone outside the situation who could give me some perspective. I found myself reaching out to Helen, my old mentor from my early days as an architect. She had retired a few years back, but she'd always been a grounding force in my life, someone with a way of cutting through the noise and seeing the truth. When she picked up the phone, I could hear her smile and the warmth of her voice. Mark, it's been too long. What brings you to call an old lady like me? I chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. I needed some advice, Helen. Things have been rough. Say no more. Come by for tea this afternoon, she said without hesitation. We'll talk. A few hours later, I was sitting in her living room, holding a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth a comforting anchor. She watched me carefully as I explained what had been happening, the affair, the therapy sessions, the way Dr. Reeves seemed to peel me apart piece by piece. I tried to keep my composure, but by the end, my voice had dropped, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Helen's gaze softened, and she reached across the table, resting a hand on mine. Mark, I don't know this Dr. Reeves, but I do know you. And I know how easy it is to get lost when someone keeps questioning your sense of self. But remember, we're more than the stories others impose on us. What if they're right, though? I asked, voice barely a whisper. What if I really am the problem? Helen shook her head slowly. We're all flawed, Mark, but that doesn't make you unworthy or broken. If someone spends all their time showing you your flaws without helping you find balance, you have to ask yourself why. Her words hit me, each one peeling back the confusion. I just wanted to fix things, to make her happy. She sighed. Sometimes, Mark, happiness is not something you can give. It's something people have to find within themselves. Ask yourself, are you bending too far? Are you losing who you are in the process? I didn't answer right away, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Helen had always been good at asking the hard questions, the ones I'd been afraid to face. For so long, I convinced myself that if I just kept pushing, kept compromising, I could somehow make things right. But maybe, in doing so, I'd let myself disappear. As I left her house, Helen's words echoed in my mind, settling in like stones. Don't let anyone else tell you who you are, Mark. That's for you to decide. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of peace. A small voice inside reminded me that I still had the right to define myself, and I wasn't ready to give that up. That evening, I sat alone in the house, a quiet determination settling over me. Helen's words had struck a nerve, awakening something I'd nearly forgotten, my sense of self. I felt it now, a fragile thread of strength that I was holding on to, despite everything. As I wandered through the house, my eye caught a framed photograph on the living room shelf, a picture of Lila and me from an anniversary trip years ago. In the photo, we looked young, happy, alive. I remembered the day vividly. We'd hiked up to a lookout point, laughing and teasing each other as we stumbled over the rocky trail. We had been exhausted but thrilled, standing together, wind in our hair, arms around each other. I'd felt a genuine connection back then, a unity that had felt unbreakable. What had changed? When had we let go of that part of us? I wondered if Lila ever thought about that day, or if it was just another faded memory for her now. The anger I'd felt over her betrayal began to soften into something else, an aching sadness. Somewhere along the way, we had lost sight of each other, caught up in the expectations and pressures we'd placed on ourselves and each other. Still, the image of her sitting across from me in Dr. Reeves' office, cold and detached, lingered in my mind. I couldn't ignore the manipulation, the calculated ways she and Dr. Reeves dissected every word I spoke. The memories of our happy years and the betrayal were tangled together now, blurring the lines between what was real and what I'd been led to believe. And the only way forward, I realized, was to separate fact from fiction, to see clearly, no matter how painful that might be. Driven by a quiet resolve, I started searching. I opened drawers, checked shelves, sifted through papers. I didn't have a clear goal. It was more of an instinct, a need to understand. I was almost ready to give up when I found it. An envelope hidden behind a stack of old magazines in her study. Inside were receipts, hotel bookings, text message screenshots, evidence of weekends she had spent with someone else, stretching back for months. My hands trembled as I scanned through them, the truth settling in like a cold weight. And there, among the messages, I found a text thread with a number labeled AR. Alan Reeves. I felt a rush of anger and disbelief. This whole time, Dr. Reeves hadn't just been her therapist, he was the man she was seeing. The therapy sessions, the relentless breaking down of my character, all of it had been a carefully orchestrated scheme. I sat back, a mix of fury and clarity sweeping over me. They hadn't been trying to help me or save the marriage. They'd been manipulating me, turning me into a pawn in their twisted game. I saw it now. Every word, every insinuation in those therapy sessions had been designed to push me toward doubt, to make me question my very identity, to weaken me. The pieces fell into place, sharp and clear. I took a deep breath, feeling my anger solidify into something else, resolve. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. They had underestimated me, thinking they could twist me into submission. But now I knew the truth, and I would fight back. For the first time in months, I felt my confidence return, like an old friend stepping back into my life. I had a long road ahead, but I knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't break me. I was going to take back control of my life, one step at a time. The next morning, a sense of calm purpose washed over me as I carefully placed the evidence I'd uncovered back into the envelope. The anger from the night before had transformed, settling into a focused determination. I had no intention of confronting Lila. Not yet. I needed to be smart, careful, and above all, prepared. I called Sarah, a close friend who happened to be a lawyer, and asked if we could meet discreetly. She knew about the troubles I was facing with Lila, but I had never given her the full details. That afternoon, we met at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, away from any prying eyes. "Mark," Sarah said, eyeing me with concern as she sipped her coffee, "you sounded serious on the phone. What's going on?" I leaned in, lowering my voice as I explained everything. Lila's affair, the therapy sessions, Dr. Reeves' manipulation, and the evidence I'd found. As I spoke, her expression shifted from sympathy to disbelief, and finally, a fierce focus. "They've both been systematically gaslighting you," she said, anger flashing in her eyes. "This isn't just about an affair. It's psychological manipulation, possibly even fraud if they're trying to gain financially from this. We need to document everything and build a solid case." She outlined a plan. Gather as much evidence as possible, especially from the therapy sessions. She explained how to discreetly record our next few sessions and advised me to act as though nothing had changed, to play along until we had everything we needed. "They'll underestimate you, Mark," Sarah said, her tone firm. "They think they've broken you down, made you compliant. Use that to your advantage." I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude and resolve. This was the beginning of my fight, my way back to the man I knew I was. Over the next few weeks, I attended therapy as usual, playing the part of the subdued husband, too broken to question. I began recording our sessions, hiding my phone in my pocket and positioning myself to ensure clear audio. It was difficult, stomach-turning even, to sit there and listen to Dr. Reeves and Lila continue their narrative, weaving lies and exaggerations to paint me as the villain. But I held my composure, focusing on the end goal. Meanwhile, I reconnected with Jake and Sam, letting them know bits of what I'd uncovered. I needed my friends around me, not only for support, but to keep me grounded in reality. They were outraged but steadfast, encouraging me and reminding me of the truth I'd nearly forgotten, that I was more than their warped portrayal. In the privacy of my office at home, I stored the recordings, carefully labeling each one. Each session added to the mounting evidence of their deceit. When I shared the recordings with Sarah, she listened carefully, her face hardening with each playback. "This is more than enough," she assured me. "We'll use this to expose them both." With Sarah's guidance, I drafted a plan, a private confrontation with Lila, followed by legal action against Dr. Reeves. I would expose his unethical behavior and bring him to the board for malpractice. Sarah also recommended a financial forensic analysis of our assets, ensuring I'd be protected if they'd made any covert moves to siphon away funds. The day of the confrontation arrived, and I was ready. For weeks, I had played my part, letting them believe I was defeated. But now, with evidence in hand and Sarah's support behind me, I felt steady, grounded. I knew who I was, and I was ready to remind them both. That evening, I returned home, my mind clear and my steps purposeful. Lila was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with a practiced nonchalance. She didn't look up as I entered, didn't sense the change in the air. "Lila," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." She glanced at me, mildly annoyed, setting her phone down with a sigh. "What is it, Mark? If this is about therapy, it's about the truth," I cut in, watching as her expression faltered. For a moment, I saw a flash of uncertainty, but she quickly masked it, giving me a tight smile. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, crossing her arms. "Oh, I think you do." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, setting it on the table between us. I watched her eyes flicker down to it, her posture stiffening as realization dawned. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "Proof," I said simply. "Proof of the affair. Proof of everything you and Dr. Reeves have been doing." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in. "I know about you and him, Lila. I know how you've been working together, manipulating me, trying to make me doubt myself. All those therapy sessions, they were never about helping us. They were about breaking me down." She took a sharp breath, visibly shaken, but she quickly tried to regain control. "You're overreacting, Mark. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice unyielding. "I understand that you betrayed me, that you sat across from me week after week, tearing down everything I believed about myself, all to justify your actions. And I have it all recorded, every lie, every gaslighting tactic." Her face went pale, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The confidence she had wielded so effortlessly for months was crumbling. "Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out?" I continued, feeling a strange mixture of anger and relief. "That I would just sit back and let you destroy everything I've worked for, everything I am?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her silence was answer enough. I took a deep breath, pulling out a folder of neatly organized documents. "These are divorce papers," I said, placing them on the table beside the envelope. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll find that I'm prepared for whatever move you might try to make." Lila's face twisted with shock and fear, her hands trembling as she stared at the papers. I waited, letting her absorb it, feeling the balance of power shift back to me for the first time in months. "And as for Dr. Reeves," I added, my voice cold, "I'll be submitting the recordings to the licensing board, as well as to the media. His manipulation ends here. You both crossed the line, and now you'll face the consequences." She looked up at me, a mixture of disbelief and desperation in her eyes. "Mark, please don't do this." I held her gaze, feeling a wave of finality wash over me. "You made your choices, Lila. I'm making mine." Without another word, I turned and left, feeling a sense of liberation as I walked out of the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I knew exactly who I was, and no one would take that from me again. The drive to my lawyer's office felt surreal. The confrontation with Lila had been intense, but as I watched the city lights blur past, a strange calm settled over me. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months felt lighter, as though each mile marked a further step toward reclaiming my life. Sarah greeted me with a nod of encouragement when I arrived. We sat in her office, and I handed over the final set of recordings, our documentation prepared and organized. She reviewed everything one last time before leaning back in her chair. "You did everything right, Mark," she said, a note of respect in her voice. "Dr. Reeves' actions are indefensible. This will destroy his career, and the divorce case is firmly in your favor." I nodded, processing the finality of her words. Sarah's support had been invaluable, and knowing she was in my corner gave me confidence. She laid out the next steps: a formal complaint to the licensing board, submitting the evidence to a trusted journalist, and ensuring every legal avenue was prepared for the divorce proceedings. Her thoroughness was both comforting and empowering. For the first time in months, I felt like I had options, choices, control. After leaving Sarah's office, I called Jake. He picked up on the first ring, sounding relieved to hear from me. "Well, how did it go?" he asked, his voice filled with anticipation. "It's done," I replied. "She knows everything, and I have the recordings ready to bring Dr. Reeves down. Sarah's handling the legal side. She's confident we're in the clear." Jake let out a low whistle. "Damn, Mark, you're a tougher man than most. I don't know many who'd handle this the way you have. You sure you're okay?" I paused, considering his question. "Honestly, I feel better than I have in a long time. It's strange. I should feel shattered, angry, maybe even bitter. But I think I'm just relieved it's over. I'm ready to start fresh." "Good," Jake said, his voice warm with support. "You deserve it. We're all here for you, Mark. Don't forget that." I thanked him and hung up, standing for a moment in the cool evening air, feeling the world stretch out before me. The sense of closure was unexpectedly grounding. Over the next few weeks, the process of dismantling the life I'd built with Lila continued. The complaint against Dr. Reeves was filed, and the media picked up the story. The scandal swept through the local circles, and his name became synonymous with deceit and malpractice. Colleagues distanced themselves, and his clients abandoned him. In a bitter twist, the reputation he'd used to manipulate me was now his undoing. Lila, too, found herself alone. The carefully constructed image she tried to uphold shattered as people learned the truth. The divorce proceedings moved forward swiftly, and her attempts to dispute the evidence fell flat under the weight of the recordings. What I once feared as an insurmountable loss turned into a quiet victory. I was left with my integrity, my career intact, and a circle of friends who had shown me what true loyalty meant. In the months that followed, I found myself reconnecting with life. I spent time with Helen, who became a source of calm wisdom, guiding me through the process of rebuilding. She encouraged me to reflect, to find meaning in the pain, and to rediscover who I was outside of the marriage. One evening, I sat with her, drinking tea as we watched the sunset from her garden. "I'm proud of you, Mark," she said softly. "Not for what you went through, but for the way you came out on the other side. You faced the darkness and found your own light." I looked out at the horizon, feeling a quiet, steady peace that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the same man I had been, and I knew I never would be again. But I had found strength in myself, a strength I had once thought lost, buried beneath layers of doubt and betrayal. And as I moved forward, I knew I was finally free, not just from Lila or from Dr. Reeves, but from the self-doubt that had kept me chained. I was whole, grounded, and ready to start again.